The moment my daughter slid that pen into my hand, I felt something colder than fear. It wasn't the bank that frightened me. I've been walking into banks for over 50 years. I've signed mortgage papers, car loans, and the documents that closed my late husband's estate. Paper never scared me. Pressure did. Just sign it, Mom, Leela said softly, smiling the way people smile when they're trying to look patient. It's routine. You're overthinking it. Routine. That word kept echoing in my mind. Her husband, Grant, stood close behind my chair. Too close. His hand rested on the back of it, fingers tightening slightly whenever I hesitated. Anyone watching might think he was being supportive, but I could feel the weight of it. The bank lobby in Cedar Glen was quiet that Tuesday afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, dust floating in the golden beams. A young teller with neat braids counted bills behind the counter. A soft, instrumental version of some old pop song played overhead. Everything looked normal. That's what frightened me most. Mom, Leela said again, leaning toward me, lowering her voice. We talked about this. It's just to make things easier. In case something happens, you don't want to deal with bills and stress anymore. In case something happens. I'm 74 years old. Of course something will happen one day. That's how time works. But I'm not confused. I still bake my own bread. I still drive to church on Sundays. I still balance my checkbook without a calculator. So why did I feel like I was being slowly erased? I glanced down at the paperwork. So many paragraphs. So many places marked with yellow tabs. My name typed neatly beside blank lines waiting for my signature. Durable power of attorney. Financial transfer authorization. Property reassignment. Big words for something they were calling routine. Grant's hand shifted from the chair to my shoulder. A squeeze, not violent, just firm enough to say, "Don't make this difficult. You trust us, don't you?" he asked quietly, his breath warm against my ear. Trust. I raised Leela. I held her through fevers and heartbreak. I worked double shifts after her father died so she could finish college without debt. I trusted her with my whole heart once, but trust feels different when it's rushed. I'd like to read it again, I said, keeping my voice steady. Leela sighed, not loudly, just enough. We already went through it at home, she replied. You get overwhelmed with too much detail, remember? Overwhelmed. The word stung. I am not overwhelmed. I am cautious. The teller glanced up briefly, her eyes flicking between us. I wondered what she saw. An aging mother, a concerned daughter, a helpful son-in-law, or something else. Leela slid the pen back into my fingers and positioned the paper closer to me. Please, Mom, she whispered, her smile tightening. Don't make a scene. Make a scene. I wasn't planning to. But as I lowered the pen toward the paper, my hand trembled not from weakness, from decision. And in that quiet, sunlit bank, with my daughter watching and her husband pressing close behind me, I realized something that changed everything. If I signed my name right then, I might never truly belong to myself again. And that's when I decided to do something no one at that desk was expecting. There comes a moment in a woman's life when silence feels heavier than shouting. As I stared at the signature line, I realized this was mine. The pen hovered just above the paper. Leela leaned in closer, her perfume, something floral and sharp, filling the small space between us. Grant shifted his weight behind me, his fingers brushing my shoulder again, as if reminding me he was there. "Go ahead, Mom," Leela murmured. "We don't have all day." That was the first time impatience slipped through her voice. I looked up at her. Really looked. Her jaw was tight. The soft crease between her eyebrows, one she'd had since childhood when she was frustrated, had returned. But this wasn't about frustration. It was about urgency. And urgency around paperwork is rarely innocent. The teller behind the counter had moved closer now, pretending to organize deposit slips. She was young, maybe in her 20s. Her name tag read Marissa. Her eyes flicked toward my hands. I lowered the pen and gave a small nod, as if surrendering. "All right," I said gently. Relief washed over Leela's face so quickly it startled me. I bent forward slowly, letting my hand shake just enough to appear frail. If they thought I was weak, let them think it. Sometimes being underestimated is a shield. Instead of signing, I shifted the top sheet slightly and let my checkbook slip from my purse onto the counter. "Oh dear," I muttered softly. "Clumsy me." Leela exhaled sharply. "Mom, please, it's fine," I interrupted sweetly. "Just need a moment." I opened the checkbook as if checking my balance. My fingers found the small square notepad I always keep tucked in the back. Old habit. I like to jot down grocery lists and scripture verses there. Today, I wrote something else. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure they could hear it. 3 words. Help me. Forced. I folded the tiny slip once and held it beneath my palm. "Marissa," I said gently, lifting my head toward the teller, "would you mind checking if I still have automatic payment set up for my utilities? I get confused with these things." Leela stiffened beside me. "Mom, that's not relevant right now." "It helps me think," I replied calmly. The teller approached. I held out my checkbook, and as she reached for it, I pressed the folded slip between the pages. Our fingers touched for just a second. She looked at me, really looked at me. And in that brief exchange, longer than it should have been, I let my fear show. Not panic, not drama, just quiet, unmistakable fear. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did. Subtle, straighter, alert. "Of course, ma'am," she said evenly. "Let me just take this to my manager." Leela's smile faltered. "Why does she need the manager?" "Just standard verification," Marissa replied smoothly. Grant's hand tightened on my shoulder. Too tight. And as Marissa walked away with my checkbook in her hands, I felt the air in that quiet bank shift ever so slightly. For For the first time that afternoon, I wasn't the only one who knew something was wrong, but I had no idea how far that small folded note was about to carry us. The longest minute of my life was not when my husband passed away. It was the minute Marissa disappeared behind that frosted glass door with my note. You learn, at my age, how to sit still even when your insides are trembling. Leela leaned closer, her voice tightening. Mom, why did she need to involve a manager? This is a simple transaction. Simple. Grant's fingers pressed into my shoulder again, this time not pretending. A quiet warning. I gently shifted forward in my chair so his hand slid off. I just want to be thorough, I replied softly. You know how forgetful I am. I said it sweetly, harmlessly, but I watched their faces. Grant wasn't smiling anymore. His jaw flexed. Leela crossed her arms, tapping her heel against the tile floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have in that peaceful lobby. Across the room, an older gentleman glanced up from his deposit slip. A young mother with a stroller looked between us. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone, and yet the tension had become visible. Through the frosted glass, I saw shadows moving. One figure, then two. Leela noticed it too. Mom, she said quietly now, her tone changing. Are you feeling confused today? We can reschedule if you're not thinking clearly. There it was, the seed they had been planting for months. Little comments at family dinners. Mom gets overwhelmed. Mom forgets details. Mom probably shouldn't manage big decisions alone anymore. Not loud, not cruel, just consistent. If you repeat something long enough, people begin to believe it. Even you. For a moment, doubt tried to creep in. What if I was being overly suspicious? What if they really were trying to help? But then I remembered the way Grant had whispered 2 nights ago in my own kitchen. You don't want things to get complicated, do you? Complicated. As if my life was paperwork to be tidied up. The door behind the counter opened. Marissa stepped out. Beside her was a tall man in a navy suit, silver hair neatly combed, glasses resting low on his nose. His name tag read Branch Manager Mr. Holloway. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry either. He was alert. Mrs. Whittaker, he said calmly, walking toward us. I nodded, keeping my expression mild. I'd like to speak with you privately for just a moment, he continued. It'll only take a minute. Leela stood up immediately. That won't be necessary. We're right in the middle of, I'm sure, Mr. Holloway interrupted gently but firmly. Bank policy requires that I verify consent directly with the account holder. Consent. The word settled heavily between us. Grant stepped forward slightly. She's fine. She asked us to help. Mr. Holloway met his eyes without blinking. I'll just need 60 seconds alone with Mrs. Whittaker. The room had gone very quiet. I could feel Leela's panic rising, not explosive, but sharp and contained, like a crack forming beneath glass. She looked down at me. For a brief second, I saw something flash in her eyes. Not love, not concern, fear. And that's when I knew the note had been read. Mr. Holloway extended his hand toward me. "This way, ma'am." I placed my trembling fingers in his steady palm and rose from the chair. As I walked toward that small office behind the counter, I realized something important. The hardest part wasn't slipping the note. The hardest part was about to begin, because once I told the truth out loud, there would be no pretending this was routine ever again. I have walked into many small offices in my lifetime, doctors' rooms, school principals' offices, even the pastor's study when my husband passed. But none felt quite like that narrow, glass-walled space behind the bank counter. Mr. Holloway closed the door gently behind us. The hum of the lobby softened, though I could still see Leela and Grant through the frosted glass. Their silhouettes were stiff, close together, whispering urgently. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said quietly, taking a seat across from me. "Are you safe right now?" No one had asked me that in a very long time. Safe. The word alone made my throat tighten. "I am," I answered carefully. For the moment, his eyes softened, but his posture remained professional. "My teller found a note inside your checkbook." I nodded. "I need to ask you directly," he continued, voice steady. "Are you being pressured to sign documents you don't understand or don't agree with?" There it was. No softening. No dancing around it. I could have denied it. I could have smiled politely and said, "Oh no, just a misunderstanding." But something in me, something that had been quiet for months, rose up. "Yes," I said. The word felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. "Yes," I repeated, steadier this time. "They've been urging me to transfer control of my finances. They say it's for my own good." Mr. Holloway nodded slowly. "Do you want to sign those documents?" "No." That one came without hesitation. He folded his hands on the desk. "Have they threatened you?" I hesitated. "Not with raised fists, not with shouted words, but there are other kinds of pressure." "Not directly," I said, "but I've been made to feel incapable, confused, like I'm a burden." Saying it out loud made my chest ache. Mr. Holloway's expression tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. He had likely seen this before. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said gently, "you have full authority over your accounts. No one can force you to sign anything. If you'd like, we can place a temporary protection alert on your profile. It will require additional verification for any large transfers or changes." Relief flooded me so suddenly I nearly wept. "Yes," I whispered. "Please." He nodded and began typing on his computer. Outside the glass, I saw Leela pacing. Grant was speaking sharply to Marissa now. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the tension in his shoulders. Mr. Holloway paused and looked at me again. "Would you like us to contact Adult Protective Services?" he asked carefully. "This could qualify as financial coercion." The word hit me like a stone. Coercion. This wasn't just family tension. It had a name. I swallowed. They're my daughter and son-in-law, I said softly. I don't want them arrested. That's not necessarily what would happen, he reassured me. But documentation protects you, protects you. All these months, I had been trying to protect their feelings, and in doing so, I had nearly abandoned my own safety. Yes, I said again, this time stronger. Document it. He nodded. When he finished, he stood and offered his hand to help me up. Are you ready to return to the lobby? He asked. I took a slow breath. I suppose I am. But as I reached for the doorknob, I realized something important. The moment we stepped back out there, my daughter would no longer be managing a quiet misunderstanding. She would be facing a mother who had finally chosen herself, and I wasn't sure she was prepared for that. When I stepped back into the lobby, I felt taller than I had in months. Not because I had grown stronger overnight, but because I had stopped shrinking. Leela rushed toward me first. Mom, what is going on? She demanded, her voice barely contained. Why are they treating us like criminals? Grant stood just behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. The softness he'd worn earlier had vanished completely. Mr. Holloway walked beside me, calm and composed. Mrs. Whittaker has chosen not to proceed with any document signing today, he said evenly. We've also placed protective measures on her accounts at her request. At her request. The words landed hard. Leela blinked. Protective measures? From who? Mr. Holloway didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Grant stepped forward. This is ridiculous. She asked us to help her. I looked at him steadily. I asked for advice, I said quietly. Not control. Leela's face flushed. Mom, we were trying to simplify things for you. You can't manage all of this forever. Perhaps not, I replied gently, but today I can. The young teller Marissa stood nearby, pretending to organize papers again. But I could see the quiet vigilance in her posture. She wasn't going to look away. Leela lowered her voice, stepping closer to me. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The question surprised me. Humiliating. That was the word she chose. Not are you okay? Not why didn't you trust us? Humiliating. I felt something inside me settle. My dear, I said softly, the humiliation would have been signing something I didn't understand just to keep you comfortable. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Grant's tone sharpened. You're making a mistake. No, I answered, meeting his eyes for the first time without flinching. I almost did. Silence stretched between us. The older gentleman who had been filling out his deposit slip earlier was openly watching now. So was the young mother by the door. This was no longer invisible. Leela's shoulders slumped just slightly. Do you think we're trying to steal from you? She asked, her voice cracking at the edges. The question hurt more than anything else she'd said. I think, I replied carefully, that you've been thinking about my assets more than my dignity. Her eyes filled, not with anger this time, but something else. Shame, perhaps. Or maybe fear of being seen clearly. Grant exhaled sharply. "Let's go," he muttered to her, but she didn't move. "Mom," she said quietly now, "if something happens to you and we can't access anything, it'll be chaos." "If something happens to me," I said gently, "I will decide who helps and how, not under pressure, not in a rush." Mr. Holloway stepped slightly forward, his presence subtle but firm. "Mrs. Whittaker's decisions are clearly stated and documented." That was the end of it. Grant turned toward the door first, his frustration barely contained. Leela lingered one moment longer. She looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time, not as an aging obligation, but as a woman who had drawn a line. Then she followed her husband out into the bright afternoon sun. The glass doors closed behind them with a quiet thud, and for the first time in months, I exhaled fully. But as I gathered my purse and thanked Mr. Holloway and Marissa, I knew this wasn't over. Because sometimes the real confrontation doesn't happen in public. It happens later, when the doorbell rings at night. That evening, the house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, just still in a way that made every tick of the clock sound louder than usual. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the small oak table by the window, the same table where Leela used to do her homework, her legs swinging because they couldn't quite reach the floor. How does a little girl who once needed help tying her shoes grow into a woman who thinks she needs control over her mother's life? The question circled in my mind as the sun dipped below the trees. At 8:17 p.m., the doorbell rang. Right on time. I didn't jump. I had been expecting it. When I opened the door, Leela stood alone on the porch. No Grant, no sharp perfume, no hurried confidence, just my daughter. Her mascara had smudged slightly. Her shoulders looked smaller somehow. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside without a word. She walked into the living room slowly, looking around as if the furniture might have changed since morning. It hadn't, but something else had. We sat across from each other on the couch. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Grant's furious." That wasn't what I had expected. Not "I'm sorry." Not "Are you okay?" "Why?" I asked calmly. "Because now it looks suspicious," she said. "Because the bank documented it. Because if anyone asks questions, are there questions to ask?" I interrupted gently. She looked down at her hands. "We've had some financial pressure," she admitted. There it was. The truth, small and fragile. "Business hasn't been steady," she continued. "Grant invested in something that didn't turn out the way he promised. We're behind on the house, the credit cards. And he thought," she stopped, "and he thought my accounts could fix it," I finished softly. Her silence answered for her. My chest ached not from anger, but from sorrow. "Leela," I said gently, "why didn't you just tell me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks now. "Because I was ashamed," she whispered. We've always looked like we were doing well. I didn't want you to see us struggling." And Grant said, "If you transferred everything early, it would be easier, cleaner, cleaner, as if my lifetime of savings were a mop for their mistakes." "You let me believe I was losing my mind," I said quietly, not accusing, just stating. Her face crumpled. "I didn't mean to," she said quickly. "It just started with small comments. And then it became easier to treat you like you needed help instead of asking for it. That was the deepest cut. Not the money, the gradual rewriting of my identity. I am your mother," I said softly, "not your emergency fund." She covered her face with her hands. "I know," she whispered. I reached out and took her fingers gently away from her face. "I love you," I told her, "but love does not mean surrendering my voice." She nodded slowly, tears still falling. "Grant wants to come talk," she said carefully. "He thinks you overreacted." I felt something steady rise inside me. "No," I said calmly. "I reacted exactly enough." She looked at me then, not as someone fragile, but as someone firm. And I realized this conversation wasn't the end of it. Because if Grant believed this was an overreaction, then the next visit would not be quiet. And this time, I would not be sitting at a bank desk. I would be standing in my own living room. 2 nights later, Grant came to my house with the kind of confidence that only men who believe they are right can carry. He didn't sit when he walked in. He stood in my living room, hands in his coat pockets, scanning the space as though assessing value. The framed photos, the antique clock, the china cabinet his father-in-law had once polished with pride. Leela followed behind him quietly. I remained seated in my armchair. "Mrs. Whittaker," he began, his tone polite but tight, "I think we need to clear something up." I folded my hands in my lap. "Then let's do that." He exhaled sharply. "What happened at the bank was unnecessary. You embarrassed us. You made it look like we were trying to take advantage of you." I studied him carefully. "You were trying too," I said gently. His jaw flexed. "No," he replied quickly. "We were trying to protect your estate from complications. If something happens to you unexpectedly, probate can freeze everything. We were planning ahead. Planning ahead. There's a difference between planning and positioning." "And why," I asked calmly, "was it so urgent?" He hesitated for just a second. "Because timing matters in investments." Ah, there it was again. Investments. "You mean your investments," I said. Silence. Leela stepped forward. "Mom, please. We're just trying to stabilize things." "By destabilizing me?" I asked softly. Grant's voice sharpened. "With respect, you're not as sharp as you used to be." The room went still. That sentence didn't sting. It clarified. I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze without anger. "Do you know what sharpness is?" I asked. He frowned. "Sharpness is recognizing pressure when it comes dressed as concern." Leela's breath caught. Grant laughed quietly, but it wasn't warm. "This is paranoia. No, I replied. This is memory. I began counting softly on my fingers. The dinner where you mentioned aging accounts. The phone call where you suggested I might forget passwords. The afternoon you asked if I'd considered assisted living. Leela looked at him. You said that, she asked faintly. He didn't answer. You have been softening the ground for months, I continued, still calm. You weren't offering help. You were building justification. Grant's face flushed red. You're twisting everything, he snapped. I stood then, not quickly, not dramatically, but deliberately. Even at 74, I can stand tall. No, I said firmly. I am seeing clearly. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Leela spoke. Grant, did you tell me everything about the investments? His eyes flicked toward her, irritation flashing. That's not the point right now. It was exactly the point. For the first time, I saw doubt enter my daughter's posture, not about me, but about him. I will not transfer my assets, I said steadily. Not under pressure, not out of fear, and certainly not to repair decisions I did not make. Grant shook his head in disbelief. You're choosing pride over family. No, I replied softly. I am choosing boundaries for family. There's a difference. He grabbed his coat from the chair and headed toward the door without another word. Leela remained standing in the middle of the room, looking smaller than she had at the bank. Mom, she whispered, I didn't realize how far this had gone. I nodded slowly. That's the problem with small compromises, I said gently. You don't notice the distance until you're already far from yourself. The door closed behind Grant, and in that quiet living room, my daughter looked at me not as an obstacle, but as a mirror, and I knew the next choice would be hers alone. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not because I was anxious, but because I finally felt steady. There is a quiet strength that settles in after you defend yourself, not loudly, not violently, but clearly. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't accused. I had simply refused. And refusal, when spoken calmly, can be more powerful than anger. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Leela. Mom, she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. I asked Grant to show me everything. I didn't speak. I let her continue. There are loans I didn't know about. Personal guarantees. He refinanced the house twice. He kept saying the next investment would fix it. The next one. There is always a next one when someone is trying to outrun consequences. And now, I asked gently, and now we're deeper than I realized. There was no defensiveness in her voice, just fatigue. I closed my eyes and remembered the little girl who once saved her allowance in a pink tin box because she liked watching it grow. She used to count every dollar twice. When did counting become avoiding? Mom, she whispered, I'm sorry. This time it wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't about appearances. It was about truth. I know, I said softly. She took a shaky breath. I let him convince me that protecting our image was more important than protecting our integrity. That word, integrity, sounded like it had been heavy in her mouth for a long time. Image fades quickly, I replied. Integrity is what lets you sleep at night. There was a pause. I don't know what to do, she admitted. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, she wasn't asking for access to my money. She was asking for guidance. You start by untangling, I said calmly. Not covering, not rushing, not transferring the weight to someone else. Silence. I don't want you to fix this, she said quickly, almost defensively. I don't want to feel alone. That sentence softened something in me. You're not alone, I told her, but you are responsible. There is comfort in that distinction. Later that afternoon, she came over without Grant. We sat at the kitchen table, papers spread between us, not mine this time, but hers. We didn't move a single dollar from my accounts. Instead, we made a plan. Call the lender. Consult a financial advisor. Consider selling assets before losing them. Face it directly. There were tears, not dramatic ones, just the quiet kind that come when illusions fall away. I was so afraid of looking like we were failing, she said at one point. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Failing isn't shameful, I said gently. Pretending you aren't, that's what costs you. As the sun began to set, she gathered her papers neatly. Grant doesn't know I came, she admitted. That's something you'll need to decide how to handle, I replied calmly. She nodded, and as she walked out the door, I realized something important. The crisis at the bank had never been about signatures. It had been about voice, and now my daughter was learning to find hers. But whether her marriage could survive that honesty, that was a chapter still unwritten. 3 weeks later, Leela showed up at my door with no makeup on and a suitcase in the trunk of her car. That was how I knew the chapter had turned. She didn't cry this time. She didn't look frantic. She looked clear. I asked him to come clean about everything, she said as we sat at the kitchen table again. All the accounts, all the loans, every signature. And did he? I asked quietly. He minimized, blamed the market, said I was overreacting. Then he asked why I'd been talking to you behind his back. There it was, behind his back, the phrase people use when truth begins to slip through cracks. I told him I needed transparency, she continued. He said I was choosing you over him. I felt a deep ache in my chest at that. I didn't want to choose, she said softly. I just wanted honesty. And sometimes that's enough to unravel everything. She had asked for joint access to the financial accounts. He refused. She had suggested selling the second car and downsizing. He dismissed it. She had proposed meeting with a neutral advisor. He called it disloyal. When someone won't let you see the full picture, I said gently, it's usually because the picture doesn't serve them. She nodded slowly. I moved out for now, she said. Just until we figure things out. There was no triumph in her voice, no drama, just fatigue and a quiet determination I hadn't seen since she was a girl saving coins in that pink tin box. She stayed in my guest room for a few weeks. We didn't spend those days whispering about him. We spent them rebuilding her. Morning walks, budget spreadsheets, honest conversations, hard questions. Not once did she ask to revisit my accounts. Not once did she mention transfers or control. Instead, she asked something very different one evening as we washed dishes side by side. "Mom," she said softly, "when did you learn to say no without feeling guilty?" I smiled a little. "After I said yes too many times." She looked at me then, not as someone aging, not as someone fragile, but as a woman who had walked through her own seasons of pressure and survived them. A month later, Leela and Grant began counseling. Whether their marriage will heal, I cannot promise. Some foundations crack quietly long before anyone notices. But this, I know, my daughter is no longer standing in my shadow, nor hiding behind someone else's confidence. She is standing on her own feet. And as for me, my accounts are protected. My will is updated with clarity, not urgency. My decisions are documented because I chose them, not because I was rushed. That day at the bank could have ended with a signature and silence. Instead, it began something far more important. It reminded me that dignity is not about age. It is about ownership. Ownership of your voice. Ownership of your choices. Ownership of your life, no matter how many candles are on your birthday cake. If there is one thing I hope you carry from my story, it is this: love your children deeply, support them when they stumble, but never surrender yourself to keep the peace. Because the moment you give away your voice, you may find it very hard to hear it again. And at 74, I've learned something simple and steady. It is never too late. Thank you for being here clearly and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.